We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. Well, if you think you're tired of the election, just take a look at the politicians. Judging by the bags under Jeremy Corbyn's eyes, the pace is already starting to get to him. Tim Farron isn't faring much better. Even Theresa May is starting to show the strain. But perhaps the winner of our inaugural bag watch should be this man, the European Parliament's chief Brexit negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt. It's a tough job, Guy, and you've got to do it. On the show this week, Rachel's going to say something unpopular, not for the first time. James is going to teach us how to play poker. Afua welcomes a manifesto for change. And Comrade Graeme is also going to agree with Jeremy Corbyn. But before that, it's me. He may be a grand fromage, but the President of the European Commission is behaving like a spoilt child. Jean-Claude Juncker is one of the men Britain must negotiate with over Brexit. But recent behaviour makes him look like a Premiership star denied a penalty. Take a look at what he said in a speech this week in Italy.
I'm agitating between English and French. But I made my choice. I will express myself in French. Because slowly but surely English is losing importance in Europe. And then...
Well, that might get a guffaw from a room full of Brussels bureaucrats, Monsieur Juncker, but you'd be a fool to turn your back on our mother tongue just to score a cheap point. English is the international language of business, of civil aviation, and is vital for trading with emerging markets such as India. So try and force all your friends to speak Francais, if you like, Jean-Claude, but you'll be cutting off your nose to spite your face. English has been spoken for more than 1,000 years, and it still will be, long after you've enjoyed your last late-night brandy. But since you insist on speaking French for now, Monsieur le Président, here's something you will understand. Jusqu'à la vôtre, mon ami.
Nick.
I can't believe I had to translate for the multilingual.
You've been practising, haven't you? It's a very subtle point that comes across when you're speaking, but I get the impression that you're quite proud of the English language and Britain's place in the world.
Yes.
So help me understand this. If you see Britain's role in the world as so crucial, why do you think that we should extract ourselves from the international organisation that is our main trading partner, our main vehicle for relating with the world? And if you think we should extract ourselves, then how can you argue that Britain should be the country at the centre of international relations and the English the main language?
In these times, these heady times of a general election, I'm going to do the politicians thing, and I'm not going to answer your question because this isn't about Brexit. This is about Jean-Claude Juncker's, I would argue, puerile... And we can have the Brexit argument, and indeed we have, but I sense perhaps the viewers would like to move on or perhaps return to it at another date. This is about someone who does wield a position of influence. I question his suitability for the post. He has now accepted that one of his staff briefed what was a private dinner between him and Mrs May, which is a pretty bad thing to do. It came out that Mrs May was, quote, a delusional woman living in another galaxy, whatever, whatever. And this was exceptionally childlike. And when you have negotiations of this level, which are crucial to Britain, no question, probably the biggest thing we've had since the World War, in fact, it will be the biggest thing, it deserves to be taken seriously. And seeing something like that, I think, just reduces it to the playground.
I would like to separate out Juncker's behaviour, which I agree there are definitely some issues with, and I think we're going to discuss that a bit later in more detail, and Guy Verhofstadt and the other people who have been...
You say Guy, I say Guy.
who've been, you could argue, a bit childish recently. I'd like to separate that from, I think, the bigger question you're raising, which is the role of Britain and the English language in Europe and the world. And I think that you have to accept that the direction that we're going in, which is increasingly inward-looking, is absolutely at odds with the idea that you're clinging to, kind of illogically, that English should be the language of the EU. Why should English be the language of the EU?
Because it is.
James.
Because it is. You know, it's 1.5 billion people on the planet speak the language.
I've had businesses in 30 countries around the world, and you know what? If I was trying to do that in French, I don't think I'd be sitting here today.
How is your
Yeah.
French?
Actually, very good. So what I'm saying is, I think what Nick is saying, it's not an opinion, it's a matter of fact. And I think for him to stand there, you know, criticising it, I think actually makes him look a fool himself. You know, if you go anywhere in the world, you know, the biggest market from a business perspective is India, 1.5 billion people. It's their second language. So to denigrate it in that way, to say, you know, English is getting a bit diluted.
Junkers was just stating fact. I mean, when the UK leaves the EU, the working language of the Commission are currently English, French and German. Now, there's no need for English to be one of the working languages of the Commission, unless it suits them diplomatically to have a working language of none of the member states.
Oh, excuse me, what are the Irish going to do?
Gaelic.
They speak, well, their
official language is Gaelic.
What, so they're going to put it into Gaelic?
They have nominated Gaelic as a language of the EU.
I think what
I know, well, the
Junkers is
Maltese
saying
have
is-
nominated Maltese, but I'm sure they fancy a bit of English every now and
it
again,
was
don't they?
Nick, it was legitimate trolling. Come on,
Of
you know,
course.
of course he can say. But just one thing on the Brexit thing, on that dinner, which you were so affronted that Martin Selmayr leaked. Let's forget that we wouldn't know about that dinner unless there was a German-speaking correspondent for the Economist newspaper sitting in Berlin who actually read it in German. We Brits could have been blissfully unaware of this because we're so monolingual that we had to depend on one foreign journalist who actually spoke a second language. And the real point that Juncker is making is we actually don't speak enough foreign languages ourselves.
I don't
so
disagree.
we can't expect the rest
Rachel,
of the world just to speak English.
Can I give you a good example of this? If you take the European Eurovision Song Contest with all the countries...
I would like you to take it. Never bring it back.
Well, if you look at that, the vast majority of those countries actually sing in English. So just to give an example, let's look at the Moldovan entry. It kind of illustrates the point.
Mama, mama, don't be so down. All the things going round and round. Mama, mama, don't be so mad. If you knew me, you'd be surprised.
That's right.
And your point is?
Who had James calm down as a Eurovision fan?
That's the most damning thing I've heard.
Street red shot.
If you have to rely on the Eurovision
Well, I was trying to make a point here. I did. Badly, clearly.
But surely, as you say, Rachel, it's just a bit of political point scoring, isn't it? And jousting and taking the mickey and winding people up. And he's got your hook, line and sinker. Yeah. He's known for his sarcasm and his mickey taking. I don't agree that it's appropriate. I think it's inappropriate because this is so emotional, these negotiations, have become so emotive and emotional that people are going to want to jump on anything that suggests that the other side are holding some sort of prejudice. And when he says something like that, although it's a joke, although it's a light-hearted jibe, people can jump on that. And actually, I think they're in danger, potentially, the bureaucrats, of actually turning some people against them that were for them, if they're not careful, because you could sit there after Juncker said that and go, actually, well, he's making a ridiculous point there. So actually, I've got a bit more sympathy with Theresa May's position and the British government's position in this. But equally, I do think we're going to see more of this because there's going to be lots of sort of shots taken just to try and create an atmosphere of conflict. And that's my broader concern, is that we actually end up in a conflict situation. I don't mean physical conflict, but a verbal conflict situation.
Well, Juncker is doing Theresa May's job for her.
I agree.
I mean, it was a huge gift to her that he came out, and everyone could now think, oh, we've got to stand up to the bullying Brussels bureaucrats now, who are trolling us on our English language and leaking. It was a gift.
I think, just quickly, he is actually doing us a favour because, I mean, of course, James, like, English isn't going to disappear as the language of business and diplomacy, but at the same time, I think we do have to think about these things. You know, leaving the EU is going to have consequences. I know you'd like us to just act like Brexit's not happening today, but it is.
No, I just didn't want to rehash the old Brexit.
Do you think that if they did, once we've left and they dropped English, would you read into that in some way, shape or form? Would you be offended by that? Or?
Oh, no, I wouldn't be offended at all. I mean, I agree with, and James is the businessman, I can't see how they can ever drop English. I mean, here's something quite funny. On Monsieur Juncker's own Twitter account, 65% of the messages are in English. So he's also, it's a true fact, he's also creating a problem for the French as well. Can we just remind you some of the words? Because goodness knows what they're going to call Saturday and Sunday, because le weekend will go. As for croque monsieur, well, that's just known as le sandwich. We'll all have to give up le smoking, and James, you'll be sending le email, as I know you regularly do. So every which way you look, it's problem. But where you are right, it's ugly mood music, isn't it?
It is, I know. But here on The Pledge, we speak the international language of love and amity, don't we?
Well, not always. A mixture of dialects.
Yeah.
But if you come back to the central point, as they say, Afua, I know that you feel that it is the Brexit conversation and that the Brexit is... Le Brexit, it probably is Le Brexit. Yeah. If Britain was to behave in a similar fashion, and Mrs May or the Foreign Secretary or the Defence Secretary was to start making cheap jibes and refusing, it would go down, understandably, very badly, and I think the British position would be weakened. We would demean ourselves.
Hold on, Nick. She accused the EU of meddling in our election completely without any legitimacy whatsoever. There's no evidence that the EU is meddling in our general election whatsoever.
Jean-Claude Juncker taking the position that he did, and we've got to tread fairly carefully because we...
in the general election?
What, describing one of the candidates... Hold on, describing one of the candidates as delusional.
She didn't. He said she was on another galaxy.
No, and a delusional woman, which we've got to tread carefully because, of course, we are in the middle of a general election.
But that's
you don't think that's... Come on, Rachel.
It was not meddling. That is a very serious international, almost crime. I mean, people in America, heads are rolling all over the shop because, obviously, they don't want to get into how the Russians could have meddled in the US election. It's an extraordinarily serious thing to say.
You don't think that briefing in any way was to try and unsettle the position of the Conservative?
As we previously concluded, it actually aided Theresa May.
Yeah, but never mind that. Never mind the way it actually turned out.
But inadvertently, he wasn't deliberately trying to undermine her position.
James?
No, I don't think his intention was genuine at all. I mean, listen, we all know it could have gone either way, and I think by releasing those comments, I think his intentions... were dishonourable, really.
Well, I hope that the junk doesn't continue, and I'm trying to move smoothly into my subject, which is junk food. Yes, exactly. So we're going to end that there and start talking about our diets. Now, I don't say this very often, but this week I found myself agreeing with Jeremy Corbyn. He's made a Labour policy pledge that I'm 100% behind. He's promised to ban junk food adverts on primetime TV before the 9 o'clock watershed, as a step towards tackling child obesity. This is a good start, but it's not enough, and I would go even further. We're allowing an entire generation to poison their bodies with junk food, and it's time we did something about it. We should start treating junk food like we do cigarettes, by banning all advertising, putting serious health warnings on food, and introducing plain packaging for the worst offenders. Now, I'm sure I'm about to be accused of advocating a nanny state, Nick. But if that's what it takes to keep our children healthy and protect them from harmful effects of a multi-billion-dollar industry, then so be it.
Well, I mean, Graeme's really accurate in saying that obesity is a huge problem. It's the new smoking. That Simon Stevens, the head of the NHS, says I've said this before, I'll say it again, it's the fat berg that's going to sink HMS Titanic. It's a national crisis, but do we really want to see those horrible pictures of, as we see on the packaging for cigarettes now, just the insides of lungs? And you can only now buy 20 cigarettes, and apparently this is actually working, because I had to buy a packet of cigarettes the other day, and I said, can I buy a packet of 10? And they said, no, you can't, you have to buy a 20. And then when the packet came, it had, some blackened, gangrenous foot on it, and it does make you think.
Do you think it works, though?
I think it does work, and I think that maybe this is the time for emergency measures, but part of me also thinks we're exposed to all sorts of temptations throughout our lives, and part of growing up and becoming adult is resisting temptation. But when it's children, I think you're right, they don't have the same controls, they don't know that you have to run a marathon to work off a Mars bar. So I think there is something to be done, probably, before the watershed in terms of banning all junk food. But then, of course, you've got ads that pop up on your laptop, but...
I've got a couple of examples before we go. I've got a couple of examples that I've had stored. I wouldn't eat them if I was you.
Junk in your trunk. You've got some junk in your trunk.
Look, that's what it could look like. That's a cheeseburger with a heart, OK? And that shows you how unhealthy that is for you. Would you eat that now?
No.
No?
No, but I wouldn't eat it before.
And then there's a lovely carbonated drink.
Right.
with a foot with a huge ulcer on it.
Oh,
look.
my God, goodness me.
Is that how you spend your spare time?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know the Premiership season's coming to an end, but you've got to find something else to do.
I blame Blue Peter.
But is that what the packaging could look like?
That's what it could look like. So that's just an example of the illnesses and diseases that you get as a result of eating and drinking these sorts of things. And
sorry, I thought you were a Liberal Democrat now.
I know,
so
but you don't live with me, and I'm also
Well, dead right I don't live with you.
I'm also a food fascist,
right?
And policewoman, and you have to be quite
Rachel,
Nazi-minded to.
But look, it is not down to Cadbury's or Golden Wonder or Kellogg's to work out what the children are going to eat. It is down to parents to say you are not having that packet of crisps, you're not having that
W.H.
and you're not having that bowl of cereal.
A huge bar of Cadbury's by the counter, saying buy a bottle of water and a Cadbury's for £1. It's down to
I agree with you, actually, Graeme. I think the concept of what cigarettes have done, we started with a real epidemic, 25 years ago. It was a genuine problem, a lot of kids smoking, etc. By banning media, by changing packaging, by doing all the things that the government have done, whether you like it or not, it has actually worked. I can't remember the statistics, but the number of people smoking today...
1 in 17 adults now.
Which has gone down,
very few
remarkably. And I think this is as bad. It's just as a big an epidemic. And I think you're right. This is kids now. And I think by having that, thrown in your face on TV, advertising, promoting it, it does encourage them, whichever way you look at it. So I think the argument that I've seen is, you'll miss out on TV programmes because the amount of money being spent on advertising helps produce better programmes, better TV, etc. But I think despite that, I would agree with you. They should ban it and it should not be encouraged.
Afua?
I think about this a lot because I have a
Really?
5, soon-to-be 6-year-old daughter who I've raised to eat really healthily, and it troubles me that she has somehow got the message that the biggest treat you can get in life is a McDonald's.
I sent her an email.
It's not...
Sorry about that, I couldn't help myself.
She's been talking to me. It hasn't come from me, it hasn't come from anyone in her immediate family. I'm sure it hasn't come from her school. The power of fast food marketing is awesome. She has kind of subliminally absorbed these images. She found out about Happy Meals. She knows about the yellow arches. It's just the most powerful marketing message you can imagine, and I think it does successfully condition. I mean, I remember when I was a child, people had birthday parties at McDonald's. I remember walking around the freezers and being like, this is really cool. So,
And on you any harm, has it? Look at you.
Well, I
would kill for a shape like... Well, that's not quite a shape like you, but a shape like... Honestly, what is the problem with you folk? Do you not see any individual response?
It is
not the role of the... We need to have individual responsibility. Smoking, by the way, James makes a decent point, smoking for underage. That is illegal. It is not illegal to have a cheeseburger. No, although I sense you guys would like to make Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken and all the other places...
Illegal, yes.
Yeah, you probably would. It doesn't work like that. You're meant to be liberal. You should be supporting me.
We can't, as a country, afford the obesity crisis. By the way, I need to correct it. 17% of adults smoke, not 1 in 17. So, including me as a social smoker.
Take the example I gave you. A young child whose parents take responsibility. Whose
is this your daughter?
Yeah, or any number of children her age.
Social media.
So who is responsible?
So Graham's busy all night long making cheeseburger boxes and things like that. It's not going to stop social media.
No, but the point is, Nick, is that by blatantly telling people or downgrading the advertising potential of these things, they don't look glamorous.
No.
It's plain packaging, and then if you go to the extreme of putting a heart or a foot on, that will put some people off. Now, that is only part of the story in the sense that you've got to have a more active society, and unfortunately, we can prove with statistics that we are becoming more and more obese as children and then as adults. And it's not just about the economics of it, but it's about, for me, it's about the balance between lifestyle. And actually, if you take things home and put them in your fridge, you're going to eat them, OK?
Right.
The idea of this is to almost prevent you or make you think twice about taking it home in the first place. Then you have the opportunity of changing someone's habits. I think there's an argument that we could all have about, the poorest people buying the most likely to buy sort of ready meals and junk foods. I think that's a valid argument. I think you've got to overcome that part of the argument. But I think in terms of the principle of it, I don't see how you can argue against it because we're reducing the amount of exercise we're doing. Right. People are obviously making the wrong choices, so we've got to help them understand and educate people away
Let
from
them
this
just
sort of
have
behaviour.
a burger and enjoy themselves.
Yeah, but have a burger.
They have a horrible
life.
life. It's pouring with rain. They've got a job they loathe, a boss they despise, a wife they'd want to leave but they can't afford to. He just wants a burger and fries. Let him have it.
One of the things that will change, and we've seen it already with a lot of the fast food...
Was that just me?
That's just you, yeah. With a lot of the fast food companies, they've actually improved the quality of their products because they're becoming more aware of the demand that there's less salt, less sugar, less fat in their produce. So actually, in a sense, if you can maintain the price point for people to buy them, but we can force companies to be more accountable with what they put in them.
Graeme, what about if we don't, instead of having those really lurid and discouraging pictures of that you had on packaging how many hours of exercise you need to take to work off that burger?
They do that already.
Actually, it's really an incredible amount of time.
I've got to move things on. So it's not the ideal way to launch it, with a series of dodgy leaks, but the newly revealed draft Labour manifesto is a breath of fresh air. Gone are the vague, centrist politics of, well, my entire lifetime, and back are the clearly identifiable policies of the left. A huge rise in corporation tax, higher income tax for the better off, hundreds and thousands of new council homes, an end to tuition fees, billions of pounds for schools, and last but definitely not least, the wholesale nationalisation of the railways, Royal Mail, and part of the energy industry. There's something here for everyone. Even bumblebees get a look in. But the main point is that this manifesto stands for something. We all know Jeremy Corbyn is a true lefty. Why be half-hearted? Labour is going all out, giving voters a clear ideological choice. And you know what? They may actually like it.
Afua, can I just get this right? So you're saying that you're encouraging him to tax wealthy people. Is that the point you're making?
If you want to get into the detail, I think that the corporation tax is a good idea. I have some issues about the income tax brackets, but I think generally the principle of asking those with the broadest shoulders to carry the biggest burden makes logical sense.
I mean, the only issue... I mean, listen, I get the whole argument that, yes, I think if we can put more money into education, I think it's a fantastic, and I'd be all for that.
And where would you like that money to come from?
OK, so let me tell you. The starting position is the government generates $570 billion a year in kind of its revenue base. So it's not they don't have the money, it's what they choose to do with the money, I think, that is in question here, because it's a case of priority. So I'll give you an example. Because of the reckless way the government runs its own finances, they've borrowed too much money. The cost of borrowing alone, just the interest charge, is £35 billion a year. So if you hadn't have made that stupid mistake, you would have the money to put in education. We spent $11 billion a year, you know, in administrating, running government. Now, we all know that we could do that better and more efficiently. So my argument is we have the money, we're just not very smart on how we deal with it. Already, people who work hard, who build businesses, who create jobs, they already shoulder the biggest burden of taxation. The top 10% taxpayers in this country pay 56% of the tax already. So there comes a point when you're killing what creates business, creates the economy, creates jobs, etc. So I'm not sure that would be, you know, how much are you going to attack them? Because they're already responsible for more than half the tax we collect.
That's true, James, but at the same time, we still have the lowest corporation tax in the G7. So the idea that we're kind of killing businesses with extortionate tax rates is simply not true. And actually, this government has lowered corporation tax and plans to lower it even further. And the rises that Labour are proposing
stimulates the economy.
Would still make us the lowest in the G7. So it's not like we're taking us into some kind of Marxist extreme.
It generates more revenue because the more you incentivise, the more you encourage. You know, look at what's happening in France today. As soon as Macron's being elected, the first thing he's going to do is cut corporation tax by 33%. Because
by 33%?
By 33%.
To what?
To 25%.
Which is still higher than...
It is, but the point I'm making is he's going the opposite.
I think it's currently at 33%,
yeah, but which means
he'll... 25%.
Which is... So he'll cut it significantly. Yeah. But the point
I'm
making...
But it would still be higher than our current rate of
But my point
tax.
is, but in Britain, because it's lower... Our economy has done brilliantly well. It encourages businesses, but also businesses invest more. If you take that away, they invest less. It creates less jobs. So what I'm saying is, I'm agreeing with you, we should find the money. I'm just saying, I think you're looking in the wrong place.
But also the fact is that the flow of money, so although you say corporation tax, that does affect real people. It doesn't just affect the businesses, it affects real people in terms of their salaries and what gets spent, as you rightly say. I think it's a really fine line between pushing people too far and obviously then letting people off not paying what you think they should be paid, and the broad shoulders argument. But it is difficult because equally, if you push too hard, particularly as the climate is at the moment with Brexit, we could end up actually going so far the other way, where we have to reduce taxes so much just to encourage people to come into the country to then stimulate the economy. So I think it's a really tricky time, and it's not that I don't agree with paying, you know, the wealthier people paying a bit more. I think particularly if it's ring-fenced. Yeah, we've had lots of discussions about, well, if you could ring-fence a certain amount of tax to the NHS, we all agreed we'd pay it. The problem is, I don't trust the people we give the money to spend it wisely, as you rightly say. And actually, I think we're going to end up in a situation where the last thing we should be doing at the moment, going forward over the next couple of years, is talking about increases in tax, purely because I think we're in such a delicate time in terms of Brexit negotiations.
While you were busy making plain food packaging, I was reading the blueprint for the Labour Manifesto, of course, Das Kapital, which is supported in part by the Shadow Chancellor and by the leader of the Labour Party. Afua, why would you want to base any form of draft manifesto on something which is in some way inspired by a regime that can be seen to be utterly bankrupt and failed around the world?
Nick, that is completely ridiculous. This manifesto is not a Marxist manifesto.
No,
and of course, somebody like you, the only thing you can say is to try and smear it in a crude and unsophisticated
James has put the most comprehensive business argument to you. I'll just add one thing, which is from the Institute of Financial Studies. I'm sure you're aware. Increasing rates will raise... Institute of Fiscal Studies, my apologies, will raise less revenue in the medium to long run because firms would respond by investing less in the UK.
That is a prediction.
Pardon me?
That's a prediction, not a fact.
Oh, so you're a better economist than these guys?
No, but...
My goodness, where does it end with you? So now you know that as well.
I am a woman of many talents. You know, what I would just like to say...
Do you not think the Institute of Fiscal Studies would be worth listening to?
The Institute of Fiscal Studies has said it is an effective way of generating revenue, that there is the danger in the long term that businesses change their behaviour or leave the country.
Or stop investing.
Or stop investing. On that, I'd like to say...
Or cut rate or cut wages for payroll.
And that's true, there can be a knock-on effect. On that, I would say, if we're that scared of alienating businesses, why have we done what they all said they don't want us to do and leave the EU? That's the first thing. And the second thing I'd like to say is that businesses, if you talk to businesses, James, I'd be interested to hear what you say about this. A lot of them complain about the problems with skills in our economy. They say that our infrastructure, the lack of skills, school leavers and graduates, is a serious problem and a cost for them. So if you invest, as this Labour manifesto promises to do, a serious amount in education, it will have a benefit, a positive benefit for businesses as well.
Listen, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think the point you're making is correct. But let me give you a parallel example. So if I run a business and I want to invest more money in my people, I don't just put my prices up. What I do is I look at the income I have and I think I need to prioritise some of that by making reductions somewhere else. I'm saying when you've got 560 billion to play with, there's a lot of flexibility there. It's choices. I'm saying that I'm not... Yeah, I'm disappointed that the government doesn't prioritise the area that you're talking about, because if they did, we have the money. You know, even the 11 billion that we spend on admin...
I was going to say, what would you... Because I often have this discussion with people on the right, I don't know if that's how you see yourself, but it's the exact same conversation I have with them about inefficiency, about saving, you know, from wasteful administration, from spending tax revenue properly. You know, we all want that. No one wants to live in a wasteful society with unnecessary bureaucracy. But if that were easy, every government would have been doing it. And meanwhile, the cost is that school funding is facing its first real-time cut. We're facing a social care crisis. The NHS is in crisis. It's damaging the fabric of society, and somebody's got to come up with the answer. And if you look at what the Conservatives are saying, they're saying they can solve it without any extra money. That, to me, that doesn't
Because
add
I
up.
think they can do it better, they can do it more efficiently, because I do think it's possible. Even if you take the 35 billion that we spend just on interest charges, if we were more disciplined, we paid our debt, we would reduce the deficit.
Yeah, I think you said that, James, which was... So can I just move it on? We could talk a long time about how when you raise tax rates, after a certain point, your revenue peaks and then it's called the Laffer curve. Oh. It's a Laffer minute. And, but what I think we should be talking about is really the political offer in this manifesto, which is, you know, he's saying we're going to be possibly a higher tax economy than we are, because what the Tories are saying is after Brexit we might have to turn into Singapore. So what we're seeing is a clear choice at last between, you know, return to the 70s or a party that wants to take the country back to the 50s, you know, where, you know, it's blue passports and bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover and Royal Yacht Britannia. So it's now a really clear choice between the two. And the red flag is now flying again in the Labour Party, and I think people will understand that. It's going to cut through, but beware raising corporation tax.
Didn't work
too
in the
high.
70s. Why would it work now?
You know what, Nick?
What didn't work? Nothing worked in the 70s, I think.
OK, I think it's enough of that. It's me next panel, and I've got a few tips for Theresa May about how to negotiate Brexit. Negotiating a deal is like playing poker. You need a poker face, and here's mine. But more importantly, you need to keep your cards close to your chest. Right now, the UK is involved in the most important negotiation we've ever faced over Brexit. On the one side, we have Guy Verhofstadt and the other EU negotiators. Across the table, our Prime Minister, Theresa May, and her team. The EU's ante was to claim that Britain should pay at least £50 billion to leave. Then, according to leaks from that notorious dinner, Theresa May claimed we don't actually owe them a penny. Nice bluff, Theresa. Now, the EU has apparently gone all in for £84 billion, a big raise even for me. Now, that's the problem. You simply can't negotiate with all these leaks. Theresa May has already said that she won't give a running commentary. But I would go further. I suggest a media blackout, a complete ban on reporting negotiations until the deal is done. Otherwise, the UK might be the one getting sold down the river.
Can't do it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, but I think that it's in our interests.
Do you have any experience in negotiating?
I don't. Not particularly. Oh, actually, I do. I've negotiated a few contracts, which is why I'm so poor. Effectively. I was going to say that's why I'm on the pledge.
Yeah, by the way, you're paying them, we get paid. You don't have to pay.
So no, I think the answer is no. No, but the reality is that there's always going to be briefings. There's always going to be moments, leaks and moments where somebody's going to try and show the strength of their hand. And the reality is, whilst I do agree that details are going to be sketchy, partly because I think you've got to try and keep some of it private, but equally because I think nobody's got a clue how this is going to play out. So it's not a case of bluffing, I think it's a case of guessing and hoping that somewhere along the line we get to somewhere that the British people find acceptable from our point of view and the EU 27 members find acceptable from their point of view. Because if they don't find it acceptable, we default to a World Trade Agreement, don't we?
And Graeme, I accept them, but the point I'm making here is simply that if you're trying to negotiate with somebody, you can't just give your hand over. And if you're trying to negotiate and the next morning, everything you were thinking, everything you were saying, or your position is all over the media, you have no chance. And my point is, as we all know, this is probably one of the biggest decisions our country will face, you know, for a long, long time. The consequences are quite severe. And as a consequence, we need, you know, our government or Theresa May to go in fully prepared with all the information and be given a chance. But if everything she's thinking, if every one of our positions is put right in front of the opposition, what chance do we have?
No, I agree in the sense that I don't think everything should be out on the table, but I certainly think in a democracy you need to be able to challenge and to be able to debate the serious issues that we're all going to face. And I don't necessarily think that comes at a cost to our negotiating position.
In the media?
Well, I think, how are you going to stop them? You can't stop them. No one's going to buy into... Nick, I mean, as a journalist, you're not going to buy into a media blackout.
Well, James, the truth is you're right and you're wrong, because you're right, this is a massive deal, and it probably would be helpful that some of it was done behind closed doors. But where you're wrong is you cannot control the media in this sense, because we don't want you talking about our Brexit negotiations. Then we don't want you talking about the expenses that we've been paying ourselves. And then we don't want you talking about this. The minute you open the door to that sort of control, let me tell you, you give away a power you'll never, ever get back. You can never allow... Unless it's what's known as a D-notice and the defence of the actual realm is reliant upon it because we've got the secret plans to some nuclear code or something.
Nick, what have we got at stake here? Look at what we have at stake.
Yes, press freedom. That's what's at stake.
The future of our country.
And freedom of speech.
I'm not
Just
denying.
little things.
I'm saying you can have all the freedom of speech you want, but not in a negotiation. But I'm saying in a negotiation...
No, but aren't you missing out the huge elephant in the room, which is that every single thing that is agreed, as Theresa May said, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and everything that is agreed has to go through 27, the European Parliament. Agreed, ticked off by them. So it cannot be in secret. There is no way it can be anything about it. It can be secret.
That's so right, and that's the difference between this and a business negotiation, James. You know, this is 27 states. This is public policy. This is national interest of kind of the highest order, and press freedom. These are the values that make our country something that we're all trying to protect. Whether we agree on the right way of protecting it is a different thing. But you can't play around with something like that. And I'll tell you what I know about negotiation, which is just a little bit, but there are two different kinds of negotiation. You can have adversarial negotiations, and then you can have hostile negotiations. Now, we're acting as if it's only when these leaks came out that this all went hostile. I think that's completely untrue. Theresa May turned this into a hostile negotiation from the outset by refusing to guarantee the rights of EU citizens, by being incredibly dogmatic about the amount that we would pay, saying that we shouldn't owe a penny. And I think that turned it hostile before these leaks. In fact, I would say these leaks were a symptom and not a cause of the fact these negotiations turned hostile.
It's in the press every single day. I can't put a newspaper down.
No, it will
Everybody has an opinion. All I'm saying is, I'm not saying no freedom of speech. I'm saying we know what we want. Everybody has an opinion, get that. But once she goes in to start negotiating on behalf of the country, what happens until exactly what you said, until the deal is done, then she communicates. But every time you go and you play a hand and you show your hand, you know, you're just putting the country, in my opinion, in a very weak position, which I think is wrong.
You say that it was Mrs May who turned hostile. Let's listen to the words, or read the words, I should say, of someone who's actually stared across the table and played poker with them, James. This is the words of Yanis Varoufakis, who, of course, was a former Greek Minister of Finance at the time of the Greek crisis. Quotes, "I was expected to sit down and compromise with the EU. I thought it would be friendly and we would agree to disagree. But they were facing me as someone who had to be crushed from day one, who should be denied any negotiation. They loathe democracy." James, if it is as grim as that, we deserve the right to know.
But he says we should walk away from the negotiations and not even have
I would
one.
like
Just
to raise
straight
another
out.
Yanis Varoufakis quote, which is who
I
said...
see you trump me. This is a real game of poker.
Theresa May got it completely wrong. You can be wrong and you can be precisely wrong. She is precisely wrong. Britain will have to be made an example of. And that's his view of the way we've handled the negotiations.
But surely that's the case, isn't it? Is the fact that, as I said before, we don't know how this is going to play out. So ultimately, if one EU member says no to one part of what we try to negotiate, the whole thing just falls and collapses. So I don't think it matters that we debate our issue. I don't think it makes our hand stronger or weaker on the basis that what we say isn't going to dictate anything that the EU say in terms of their position. Their position is going to be their position. And if we don't... And I would almost bet that we're going to end up in a situation where there won't be an agreement because we won't even be able to get past the divorce settlement.
I get that, and I suppose my point here is we put politicians in power, we elect these people to represent the interests of the country. They are in that position to go in and negotiate. I'm just saying give them the tools to do the job and do it fairly. I'm not saying that we should hide what they do. We all know what this country wants. We've debated all these points time and time again about immigration, about, you know, the economic policy, the trade agreement, etc. But once you go into that position, to then get a running commentary or leaks that come out of it, I just think damages our ability to do the right thing for this country.
Before we move on to my topic, I want to see everyone's poker face. Vic?
Oh, I'm going to get the giggles. I'm sorry.
Afua,
Maybe
you
get
can't
the
do
giggles.
it.
Sorry.
We've seen yours.
What's yours?
Yeah, yours.
Scary face.
That's the face you employ with your children most of the time.
That's my sex.
Why are you looking at me?
I'm not looking at you. Right, moving swiftly on. If Michel Dewberry can tease to the break in French, then so can I. Merci, Monsieur Macron, pour tous. Vive la France, en marche. The EU heaved a sigh of relief when Macron became the youngest leader of France since Napoleon Bonaparte, beating the woman who would have taken France out of the euro and possibly Europe. After the defeat, Marine Le Pen said she's now going to rename her party. What could possibly be wrong with the National Front? But it's not just the French that are seeing a bit more clearly now. After serial warnings that a tsunami of populism was coursing across the globe, the tide has perhaps turned. I think populism has peaked and we've reached the high water mark. Geert Wilders came crashing down, quiff and all, in Holland. Trump may claim to be populist, but he didn't even win the popular vote. And UKIP lost the seats they were defending in local elections and the party is now a busted flush. It seems Britain and America are the only two countries to have been swept anywhere by this apparent populist wave. Brexit, some say, led to Trump. However, they can change their minds in 4 years, but here, Brexit is forever. And it will just be us left high and dry.
You know, I loathe the way that people in their hummus-eating, yoga-practising, tennis-playing, Waitrose shopping way sneer at what...
That's you!
I'm coming to you in a moment, I'm just going to... sneer at what you call populism. Populism is actually the exercise of democracy, and that is what happened here, and that is what happened in the US. But you are so fundamentally wrong about France. You're saying that people, quotes, can see a bit more clearly now. Don't you realise that this was a revolt just by a different cause? Because Emmanuel Macron, this is the first time since 1958, was not from either of the two main parties. They are still cocking a snook at the traditional party system. They still doesn't work. And if you drill down through the figures a little bit more, he won, and he won with a good majority, I'll give you that. 35% of the electorate were against him. There were a record number of abstentions, and it was a far lower turnout than you believe. So, yeah, did we have Le Pen? No, thank the Lord, mon Dieu. We did not have Le Pen, and we all celebrate that. But please don't read too much into that. A lot of France was too bored. A lot of France just didn't like the other candidate. And what you call populism, which is actually the real sentiments of people, this is the first time we've seen politics like that in the thick end of 60 years. The revolution is still out there. Les Miserables lives on.
I don't think you're quite right in saying because Macron is an independent who's only been in politics a year, who's never held elected office, that he's populist.
Hang on, he's right.
You cannot say that Macron is a populist leader because he is not one of the two main parties. As Douglas Carswell argues in his new book, which is called Rebel, which I think is maybe about himself. No, I'm not, but he has a theory, and I think it's all you should credit people when they come up with a theory, which is that the so-called populist leaders, let's leave Marine Le Pen aside, are just as traditional, come from the elites. Look at Trump in America. Macron, you know, was NR. Exactly, so Macron was NR, and now he's in the Élysée. What's populist about that? It's a distillation, it's using the rabble, as it were, to lever yourself into power. And that's over. Populism is popular, but maybe no longer.
But also, picking up on a point that you said, where people are a bit disillusioned with traditional sort of parties. So we're living in a far more divided world, or far more divided country, whether it's France or England, America. And that gap between the haves and the have-nots seems to have feel like it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, even if you go back 100 years, obviously it hasn't. But at the same time, what I like, I think where he resonated, Macron, with people, he galvanised them, and it was about reconciling differences rather than creating more divide. And I think actually the centrist sort of opportunity, whether that's in this country or in France, is about trying to get all of those people, of which there are more than anybody else, that believe in actually working together a bit more, to actually vote for someone or have someone to vote for. And the problem is over here at the moment, I don't think we have that. We've been talking about, you know, the red flag at one end and obviously what Theresa May's doing at the other, which seems to be far more right. What about for the mass? What about, and in a funny way, that would be redefining populism.
Afua, just can I ask you, because we've seen politics becoming much more presidential here with Theresa May standing in front of posters that don't mention the Tory party, that just say, you know, Team Theresa May's team. And in America, Trump, as it were, became very demagogic. I mean, used the power of the crowds and rabble-rousing in order to, as I said before, to get himself into the White House. In the Labour Party, which was your topic, I mean, it's still about the Labour Party, isn't it? It's not about... which is a Labour movement still. And do you think
I think it's actually. I think it's interesting because I agree with a lot of what you said. I don't think populism is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Bernie Sanders in America was, you could describe him as a populist candidate. Jeremy Corbyn at one point, with a huge momentum movement and this huge rush of
I suppose it was all the 500,000
record numbers of people joining the Labour Party. It was a populist moment. I think the thing that we're concerned about is far-right populism. And I think I really want to agree with you, Rachel. I really want it to be over. But if you look at the French election, what really troubled me was if you break it down by age, 18 to 24-year-olds, 44% of them voted for Le Pen. It's almost the reverse of in this country, yes, where the overwhelming majority of young people were pro-Remain, more to the left. In France, 44% backing the far right, and that's the future. So I worry that actually we are going to see this sentiment persisting for a long time. And if you come back to the UK, I mean, the reason that UKIP has disappeared is because the Tories ate them. I mean, literally, they have absorbed their politics.
Populism is a synonym for nationalism. No, James, what do you think?
I agree with you, but I think the point you were making, which I kind of picked up on, you said the tsunami's over, and I think you're right. That doesn't mean people don't favour populism. They do, and I think that's kind of more than we've ever seen it before. But I'm actually pleased to agree that actually I think it's now tailing off, that I think there's a bit of a balance. But that creates its own problem because in all of these countries, there's a much bigger percentage than there's ever been before. And I think the fear was that it might overtake the whole kind of democracy.
And that hasn't happened.
I think it hasn't, and I think it's tailed off. But I think you're right, Nick. What it's left in America, in France, in England, is a huge amount of people that are now divided. And I think the challenge for all of these countries is massive because we are so divided.
Can I just bring in a clip that we've got which relates to this point about what's actually happened to the kind of populist UKIP sentiment in this country, and it's no other than Nigel Farage breaking it down like only he can.
Not that man again.
I tell you what's strange is that I watch the Prime Minister every day on the news using exactly the same words and phrases that I used for 20 years and was vilified for, and she's about to win a huge majority. Look, in a way, come on, it's a fantastic victory for us.
I mean, much as I disagree with everything that Nigel Farage said, you can't disagree with that. It's kind of, they've won the argument, and now they're framing the political debate. So populism has become so mainstream that it's kind of, it's succeeded itself out of existence.
Ultimately, I think, you saying, is it the end of something? Have we peaked? I think that, I don't think we have, in the sense that I think that the way people consume information through social media, through 24-hour news channels, I think that they'll hook onto certain bits of policy and rhetoric without then maybe questioning and looking at more detailed reasons behind why, how something's achievable or not. So I think, in a funny way, if you time your sort of moves at the right time, people will suddenly believe in you. They won't question why.
Let me ask you this.
Yes, go on.
How have you gained this insight into France and the French people of late? How have you managed that, Rachel?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, because it reminds me that Marine Le Pen, in her, as it were, acknowledgement of defeat speech, said that she felt France divided into globalists, and I'm a proud international globalist, globetrotter, and patriots, and in a way that's just playing on national...
You haven't answered the question. What have you done recently to gain an insight into the French political system and France?
What Graeme was saying.
Can I put it a different way? Have you not been campaigning for your new friends in the Lib Dems and instead been playing tennis in the Sud de France, and rather successfully to boot?
Yes, I have.
Well done.
Hashtag winning. Thank you very much.
Congratulations on winning the cup. Well done.
What was the great point you were going to make, because you said that I said something earlier?
Well, you see, your question, you were saying populism won't have peaked because people will just find it in other places, go on social media. But actually, if you look at UKIP and the way that, as Nigel was saying in the clip, the way the Conservative Party have adopted the entire wholesale UKIP agenda, and it's become CONKIP. What is the scope for a populist movement now?
But that's so they've hijacked it, obviously, yes, as he says. But at the same time, it still gives voting people a route to sort of to trust in something that they have been told is the right way forward. So I think that you're always going to get... It's like a big corporate is going to buy up a smaller company when it comes up with a good idea. The big parties are going to adopt policies. You know, I believe strongly in the environment. I campaign for the environment. So I don't ever believe the Green Party are going to be very successful. But the more people that show an interest in that, the more chance the big parties are going to adopt those policies.
But Rach, the French Revolution goes on without the guillotine and the barricades. This is a party that didn't even exist a few months ago. He doesn't even have any members of the party, and they're all standing in next month's election. It's not traditional politics.
I think it's going to galvanise, actually, a new political class of independents, which might be very exciting.
Just before you close, Rachel, just ask the question. So what's the answer? So if we've got such divided states now, how do we resolve that issue? How do we have a country with, you know, people with such extreme views?
I've got an answer.
Go on, Afua.
Inequality. Inequality. You know, the evidence is that the more unequal societies are, the more nationalist and populist they become. The facts are there, you know, and so I think this is a reaction against inequality, but it's manifesting as xenophobia and fear of globalisation.
Can I just finish with my favourite quote from Margaret Thatcher on that, what goes back to your red flag, which is socialism works fine until you run out of other people's money. Right, so it's time now for Straight Talker of the Week. Our chance to celebrate someone who, like us on The Pledge, really says it like it is. And it's been a close-run thing. But just pipping Philip May and Prince Philip to the post, sorry, Your Royal Highness, I'm giving it to Hayley Cropper. Yes, I do watch Corrie, Nick, a.k.a. Julie Hesmanhauge, for this rousing introduction.
And now, everyone, please give a warm and riotous Manchester welcome to a man who has dedicated his life to giving a toss about other people, Jeremy Corbyn.
Take a bow, Julie. You clearly give a toss too, and for that you are this week's Straight Talker. What do you all think, panel? I wanted to give it to Philip because he said he wasn't told by Theresa May when to put the bins out.
Yes.
He did it on his own.
Who puts the bins out in your house?
Not my husband.
I can respond to that, but it uses the word toss, so I think it's best I don't, and I just allow you to...
Who do you think puts core bins out? Sorry. Oh, goodness. Right, that's it for this week. Any men watching, don't forget to put the bins out without being asked. Goodbye.